I stand by the rather controversial idea that horror is scary. A well-planned, designed and curated horror experience is usually enough to ruffle my feathers, rustle my jimmies, and in some extreme cases, shiver my timbers. But sometimes game devs take a different route and forsake stability in the name of unpredictability, or replayability, or a preference in development styles, or... well, there's many reasons to do this. What I'm saying is, sometimes game devs make randomized horror games, and good lord, they scare the shit out of me. And in this video, I'll be looking at 5 of them, as well as 5 little horror-themed games which aren't necessarily scary. So let's jump in and take a look at procedurally generated horror. So, I hear you're a fan of games like Amnesia, Soma, Outlast and so on, and by extension you're a fan of structured and intentionally designed enemy encounters, mixed with meticulously crafted puzzles? Well boy, do I have the game for you! Well, so long as you can ignore that stuff and settle for the itch.io horror shovelware simulator that is Monstrum. So let's establish what parts of this game are procedurally generated and or randomized. Map layout and item placement change each time, which is fairly standard, but Monstrum has one big ka-chow factor, that being that every time you start a new game, you'll be given one of a possible 3 enemies, each with their own mechanics, AI, pacing, and oh look, you can just run away from them. The only thing that stays consistent are the game's objectives. You must escape this ship, either using a submarine that's in the hold, a life raft, or a helicopter that are on the deck. One thing that's worth noting is that this ship is fucking enormous. Now, you may think that this makes the game more daunting, you know, like you're playing in some grand, boaty labyrinth. But keep in mind that there's only one enemy, so it's kinda like playing Pac-Man, but if Pac-Man was taking place on a big boat and there was only one ghost. Honestly, I reckon it's possible to go through 95% of each game without even knowing that there's a threat around. As for the more technical aspects of the game, the audio is generally pretty good, so long as you don't pay much attention to the mixing. Jesus Christ! Oh, also, here's a big question for you. When I bring up boats, what do you think about? Grass? Maybe sand? Blood? Space? Who knows? While all of those answers are acceptable, I typically choose water. You know, the loud thing that's full of fish and James Cameron? Well, according to Monstrum, the ocean makes this noise. The fish and or James Cameron must be asleep. This is genuinely what bothered me the most about Monstrum. Why is the goddamn ocean silent? It's well known for not being that. Look, I will, with my human face, fill in the ambience for you. Fish noises. One more thing about the boat setting is that it's a very cramped and kind of samey environment. So regardless of the enemy type, map layout and item placement, it still feels like you're playing the same monotonous, cramped, hidey monster game every single time. I do think, however, that the game would work better in VR, which is built into the game, but even then I see it becoming very disorienting, though that might be the point. But VR is really the only way I can possibly explain these goddamn hand animations. Plus, VR has come really far recently in the horror genre, so I don't think that the tech demo feel of Monstrum can really cut it anymore. The game initially terrified me, but I quickly learned that holding the sprint button and having a vague idea of your surroundings was enough to win. So, with that disappointment, let's move on. I believe the number of people that have heard of this game is somewhere in the negatives, which is a shame because it's, as the kids would say, fun. Unloved is an up to 4-player procedurally generated co-op horror FPS game which I think may be the only one of its kind, correct me if I'm wrong, where you are stuck on an endless elevator that is constantly descending further into randomly generated hell. But hey, at least you've got dress sense. So, the elements of the game that are randomized are the level layouts, enemy spawns, item placements, and network stability. And the game largely plays like a mix between Left 4 Dead and a 90s shooter, which makes a lot of sense because the game is based on a Doom 2 mod called Unloved, which is more or less the same so long as you don't pay attention to the fact that it's very different. Now, weirdly, for a game that's made by one person and is super obscure and also based on a fairly rudimentary FPS from the 90s, Unloved has a pretty spectacular amount of depth. For example, the difficulties. Yeah, they have the standard thing of enemy health and damage scaling, but it also adds new enemies, new rewards, new enemy variants with the Rotten, basically elite units, and then eventually boss enemies with their own special spawning mechanics and combat abilities. And on top of that, you can change map themes, sizes, and game modes, which all add their own unique challenges. So basically, it's an extremely customizable experience. If you want a 4-player run-and-gun game that'll last 5 minutes, you can do that. And if you want a slow-paced 1-player horror experience on a labyrinthine map, you can have that too. Then there's the trinket system, which is just a whole other fucking thing, and item chests and costume colors and notes, and good lord, there's a lot going on. But the biggest thing that I want to talk about is the heat mechanic. Well, Painticus, what is this heat mechanic? Good question, because we don't really know. All we do know is that it's the game's primary balancing system. You see, when you start a game, you'll see that there are items all over the place, and that may have you thinking, haha, what a treat! Gaze upon all of these delectable treats. Did I use the word treats twice? I did, goddammit. For myself and my online associates. But no, stop thinking that, you naive fuck, because the more stuff you pick up, the more angry creepies will be coming. Now that may sound like a relatively simple mechanic. The more ruckus you cause, the more ruckus will be delivered onto you, but the complex part is, nobody really knows the details of it. It's massively inconsistent, yet it's always present. So, yeah, in a sense, even the balancing feels randomized. So anyway, how scary is Unloved? Well, playing in co-op it's not too bad, but it'll almost always be tense. Single player, however, it is nerve-wracking. You have to scour these horrific locales for keys and supplies while spooky shit comes at you left, right, and center. Sounds basic, but it's effective. Overall, Unloved is really fun if you have people to play it with. Hell, if you join my Discord, you'll be with 80% of the player base. Yep, all 4 of us. Picture this. You're looking through horror games. You see an Amnesia over there, a Resident Evil over here, maybe a sprinkling of Five Nights at Freddy's, or maybe even a sneaky little cry of fear. But then you notice, lying solemnly in the corner, a dusty digital storefront page for a game with 800 reviews, and you think, ha! How quaint! A procedurally generated gothic horror game from a failed development studio in 2003. It must be terrible, but you're wrong. This is no ordinary procedurally generated gothic horror game from a failed development studio in 2003. This is Nosferatu, The Wrath of Malachi. So this is a genuine classic among horror games as a whole, let alone procedurally generated ones. While it can definitely be noted for its clunk and repetitive nature, as well as some questionable gameplay shifts towards the end, pretty much every aspect of this game is spectacular, especially considering it came out in the year of our Lord, 2003. So the setup is Dracula, or at least little own brand Dracula, has all of your family and such locked away in his procedurally generated castle, and you must save them from the claws of evil, or a window. Now, I won't dilly-dally for too long in this game because it is absolutely worth its own separate video, more so than pretty much any of the other games I've said that for, but here are the key points. The randomized parts of the game are relatively passive compared to many of the other games on the list. Yes, rooms, NPCs, enemies, items and so on are in different places, but I don't really think that's what defines the game. The gameplay experience will be fairly similar however it's laid out. What does define the game is the atmosphere. The Twitch VOD footage in the background doesn't fully capture the feel of the game, so I'll make some adjustments. Let's lower the saturation a little, take the brightness down a notch, ever so slightly increase the color temperature, slap a vignette on, now we add some ambient weather, some ominous background stuff, and finally some organ music. Now that's Nosferatu. The frightened determination of a man wandering into a seemingly dormant yet eerily writhing lair of an ancient evil has rarely, if ever, been communicated in a better way. In other words, spooky goodness! It does this mostly through audio. Jesus! Yeah, it's pretty intense, but the visuals, pacing, and enemy aesthetics certainly help too. Since I brought up pacing, I really must talk about the questionable gameplay shift that happens pretty much as soon as you find the machine gun. The game goes from being a slow and methodical horror exploration game to... And some people in my Twitch chat noted this as being, and I am paraphrasing, very fucking strange. However, I kinda like it. It destroys any sense of difficulty, yeah, but it's immensely satisfying, and it does happen at roughly the same time that the core gameplay loop starts to lose momentum, so I'm totally for it. And while the word difficulty is floating around, I must mention that this game is, and I'm not paraphrasing, very fucking difficult. initially. And that's just on normal mode. There is a nightmare difficulty option which, honestly, just sounds tediously difficult. Tune in at the time on screen to watch me stream it. Anyway, that's all I should say for now. Let's move on. Actually, one more thing. Greg is spectacular. Genuine question here. Can you name me another game that has both a pray for help and attack yourself option? Because personally, I can only name games that should have these. So picture the Elevator from Unloved, make it a touch more pixely, add quite a lot more meat, and then make it fucking terrifying. That's Golden Light, except it's single player, has more mechanics, and it has a very peaceful field. Oh god, oh shit! So this is an early access first-person horror roguelike where you descend into meat hell to try and find your wife. Oh, you can also cycle around in some kind of nightmare meadow, but what really sets this game apart is quite how much of it is randomized. So, according to the developer, there are randomized procedurals in almost every aspect of the game to some degree. Which may sound like a bold claim, but it's largely true. Here's a list of things. The story, the objective. These are the things that do not change. So the map, enemy and item placement, weapon stats and effects, consumable effects, door reliability, audio cues and bike handling are all seemingly unreliable. I say unreliable because I feel like I've said randomized quite a lot. You know, gotta throw in a bit of variation for the lads. In any case, this is absolutely the most dynamic of the games and definitely the most consistently frightening, because most of these games rely on a core gameplay loop, and most of them have some degree of power creep. The scare factor does diminish as you get stronger and more conditioned. And that does happen here too, but the way this game handles enemies makes it far more frightening in the long term. That's because the enemies can be fucking anywhere, posing as anything. A stack of books, a vending machine, a TV, a door, a freaky eyeball thing, the actual ground. And that's not even considering the consumables which can poison, explode, burn, or reveal you to enemies. Like, goddammit, I just want to read some books and eat some delicious fish heads in peace. Stack all of this with the fact that the game is amazingly dark and claustrophobic, and you've got yourself a little thing that I like to call, fuck, that's scary. Another thing about this game is how hard it is, and let me tell you, it is certainly not easy. As soon as you start running into the big eyeball guys, let's call them ocular Orwells, you're gonna be grateful that the game is a roguelike, which respawns you rather than straight up failing the game each time you die. One of my favorite things about the game, though, is the sort of surreal humor it throws at you. It stops the game feeling edgy and makes the whole experience feel very like a nightmarish version of the Norwood Suite, which is funny because that game is already quite nightmarish. Tonally, the whole game feels like the talking fetus from PT was turned into an entire game, and I love it.
Ocular Orwell was such a drag.
Now, there's a lot more to say about Golden Light, like the horrifying audio, the hilarious item names, the unique monsters and the eyeballs, and Big Piano Man, and Bike. But the game is releasing a demo the week that this video is uploaded, so go and explore it for yourself. It's excellent. Links to it are in the description, and make sure to tell the dev that I sent you. Let's move on. If you're watching this video and you haven't played Prey, then your existence haunts me. It's like System Shock 2 but made by the developers of Dishonored, which is to say that good old Prey is A-OK, which means it's good, go and play it. Prey Mooncrash, however, takes the wonderful immersive sim sci-fi horror action stealth game and turns it into an immersive sim sci-fi horror action stealth roguelike game, with points and deaths and randomization and what have you, but unlike the other games on this list, Mooncrash has a consistent map. Therefore, on your first few runs, you may not even notice the procedural generation until you enter a room that you're intimately familiar with, and yet, now it has no weapons, equipment, or consumables in it, and is now being perused by a moonshark. Golly gee gubbins. While the game doesn't quite compare to the others in terms of pure dynamics, it has two mechanics which are immensely interesting. The first is the survivors mechanic. So at first glance it may seem like there are 5 playable characters to choose from, and yeah, that's right. So you pick a character and start the game and finish it without too much hassle. Maybe you used some healing supplies or finished it with a whole lot of unused materials. No big deal though, you won. Good job. Upon finishing, however, the game then prompts you to pick another character and start again. And upon starting, a horrifying realization comes over you. All of your previous character's actions have carried over. So now you must do it all again, but with less resources, more enemies, and one less method for escape. I can't emphasize how much I adore this. Every time you play, you must also actively think about your next playthrough. Do you pick up that weapon now to make this escape easier, or do you sacrifice it to allow the future you to use it instead? At first, this isn't a huge deal. The game is fairly easy. This brings me on to the second mechanic, corruption. The base game of Prey had the wonderful quality of being playable at pretty much any pace. Mooncrash, on the other hand, hates you. To put it shortly, the longer you take, the harder it gets. More enemies, stronger enemies, and if you take too long, it just straight up auto-fails you. Keep in mind that you have to beat it 5 times with different endings with this counter going, and believe me, this counter is not a merciful thing. But it lends this wonderful suspense to everything. It really feels like shit is getting bad, and quickly, so you have to get these 5 people off the moon using the limited and unreliable resources provided. And to add even more flavor to this delicious lunar sandwich, it's an immersive sim. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of ways to approach the obstacles in the game, provided you're both savvy and resourceful enough, so all in all, Prey Mooncrash is excellent. Genuinely top tier stuff, and I fully recommend it. And you know what? This means something pretty special. Of the 5 main games I've talked about, each with their own concept, gameplay, variables, and tones, I only disliked one of them. And even that wasn't a particularly strong dislike, so for a game genre that's all about unpredictability, it's pretty consistently good. Thanks for watching. You can follow me on Twitter at PainticusYT, on Twitch at twitch.tv/Painticus. You can join my Discord in the description. You can support me on Patreon at patreon.com/Painticus. I'd like to shout out one patron in particular by the name of Teeps, Slayer of Mortals and Tyrant of Realms. We praise him for we have no other choice. And, well, I'll see you all next time. Wait. What am I doing next time? No. That's not the next video. That's not the next video. I'll make something up in the meantime. God damn it. So, you like the idea of procedurally generated games, but you're not too big into horror? Hey, listen, I can give you some horror-themed games that aren't too viscerally scary, if not scary at all. Firstly is the quintessential roguelike game, The Binding of Isaac. Now, you may say, Painticus, The Binding of Isaac, that's not horror, and I say, listen, it's a game about a very small boy being abused by his religious zealot mother, being forced into the basement and hiding, where he goes on to fight demons, mutants, monsters, literal Satan, an angel, and the personification of insanity. I would say the game is pretty goddamn scary, at least thematically. Gameplay-wise, it's more just fun than anything else. I can fully recommend it. It's the roguelike game. Go and play it. It's good. So you're back looking for another not-so-scary roguelike game. Let me just open my notebook so I can remember what I'm actually talking about here. Yes. Eldritch. So, somebody got The Binding of Isaac, thought, hey, let's make it 3D, mix it with Minecraft, and then make it all about Lovecraft stuff. It's Eldritch. It's pretty good. Relatively bare bones compared to The Binding of Isaac, but still, if you're looking for a horror-themed game with lots of replayability, Eldritch is the one for you. It's got cool fish people, scary penguins, go nuts. What's that? You want another Lovecraft non-horror yet horror-themed game? Well, this one's a touch spookier than the others. Lovecraft's Untold Stories. It's like a twin-stick shooter-like thing where you go around. It's basically The Binding of Isaac. A lot of these are just like The Binding of Isaac, but this one's more like, it's still fun though. It's still fun. Go and play it. It's good. What's that? You still want another Lovecraft horror, non-horror thing? Can you tell this bit's not scripted? Well, I've got a game for you. It's called Sunless Sea. I've spoken about it a lot on the channel. Very fun. You play as a boat, you go around a creepy ocean, picking up stuff, shooting things, there's crabs, there's madness. It's procedurally generated. I'm eventually gonna make a video on it, but until then, I'm just gonna keep on telling you, it's good. Go and play it. You're a boat. Ah, well, I can give you one more non-horror yet horror-themed procedurally generated game because I know you're just desperate to hear one. This one's called This War of Mine. Isn't life shit? Get him, get him, get him. I got him!